Eleanor, I have to tell you first, congratulations on your latest book because it was out earlier this year, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it came out, I think in January in the States and then in March in the
March.
UK. And now it's just come out last week, I think, in German, which is exciting. So
Yes, I saw that, and I love when titles are taken into other languages. I absolutely love it because, well, you reach more people, but also I like the fact that there are so many translations. So well done, you. Do you want to talk
thank you.
about your this book because it's quite a verb book?
Yeah, it's either other. Okay, so the book is called The Once and Future Sex, Going Medieval on Women's Roles in Society. And it does kind of what it says on the tin there, right? So what I wanted to do was talk about ideas about gender and women in the medieval period and now, right? Because I think one of the big things that we struggle with as a society when we talk about women is we have this tendency to say, oh, well, things have always been like this. You know, like we've set up our society in such a way that it disprivileges women because women are just like X, right? They're like whatever thing. And so as a result, we have to make sure that women are kind of the less privileged gender because they can't do whatever. And the thing about that, when you kind of look into it historically, is that we keep the whole, well, women have to be less privileged than men bit, but we're constantly changing the math about why women have to be less than men. And, you know, when you go back and look, for example, at medieval justifications for why women are less than men, we don't agree on most of those things. Right. So what I've done is I've got a kind of introduction that gets people sort of used to how medieval people think about gender. So talking about stuff like Aristotle and Plato and Galen and Hippocrates and all of the classical authors and philosophers who influenced medieval society. And then, of course, you know, medieval society is like, I always say it's kind of like improv, where they just go yes and. So they just take everything from the classical period, right? And then they kind of like slap some Christianity on top of it. And they're like, "Pada, that's how we're going to think about things." And so then you get all of the kind of like Christian ideas about women are bad. So like think Eve in the Garden of Eden. And then when everybody can understand that structure, then I talk about beauty standards, sex standards, and standards for working. So ideas about women's jobs and women's work more generally. So I think it's quite fun because it covers, I think, a lot of the major ways that we still are kind of fighting these grounds in terms of how we think about women. And I think also reveals a lot of things that people just haven't had time to think about or learn about. I think the way that we talk about women and work now is that, oh, it's this newfangled thing and we just came up with it in the 60s. Or like maybe if you want to say World War II and you want to talk about Rosie the Riveter, everyone will be like, oh, and isn't it amazing because now women work. And before that, women didn't work. And it's like, women have always been working. Women have always worked. Women have constantly worked. And, you know, of course, part of that is there's the very important feminist argument that, you know, work inside the home is work. You know, hint, hint. You know, like giving birth to children, that's work. Taking care of children, that's work. Doing housework, that's work. You know, we call labor because it's work. You know, so and that's all, you know, perfectly, you know, understandable. And I think that we're really primed to think about that. But the point is that women were always doing a bunch of work on top of that as well. They were never just, quote unquote, wives and mothers. And in medieval society, it's pretty much expected that women will do almost everything that men do. It's just they won't get social credit for it, if that makes sense. So like, you know, 80% of everybody thereabouts are peasants, right? And on the farm, there isn't really anything that is necessarily one gender's work. Now, there's things that are more likely to be gendered, like animal husbandry is more likely to be women's work, right? So it's like milking the cows or feeding the chickens or what have you. Like that's a little bit more likely to be for women. It's a little bit more likely that men will be plowing fields, but we know that women also plow fields. And if your husband dies, or, you know, you're going to be out there doing it. Everyone just kind of mucks in. So on the farm, just it is what it is. Everybody does everything, right? Then if you kind of have a look at the work that people often do on top of that, like there is some that is very specifically gendered towards women, and it's stuff like brewing. That's like the really big one, is that women make beer or ale, as it were, which always kind of surprised people now because like they tend to think of beer as like a dude's thing, and it's like that was for women very specifically. But then also, you have things like, oh, well, baking and going to market and selling things on stalls. And then kind of as you creep up the echelons in terms of money in society, you find women everywhere as well. So if you come into the cities and you look at people who are in the skilled trades or guilds or something like that, women are always doing all the same work that men are. So say your husband is, I don't know, a wax chandler, okay? He makes wax candles. That was the first guild that popped into my head. So, and then you also make wax candles, right? Like that's just kind of how it works. And it's very common that people who are within one guild, their children will marry the children of other people in guilds. So if your dad's a wax chandler, you're going to marry, the daughter or son of another wax chandler. And women will do all of that same work. But then at the same time, there's this very specific feminized labor, which is keeping the books. So like doing the books, doing the accounting, all of those maths things, that's very specifically for women, and women do these things, right? And now you maybe can't really necessarily be part of a guild yourself as a woman unless your husband dies, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, well, okay, she's in the guild now, that's fine, unless she remarries and then she can't be in the guild anymore. But that's kind of an acknowledgement of the fact that women are doing everything. They're doing all of these things. And then if you get to the very highest ranks of society, so like the nobility and royalty and stuff like that, are women knights? I mean, sometimes, not very often, but, they are doing diplomatic stuff all of the time. Queen's roles, you would be one of the best placed people to talk about this, but Queen's roles are very, very similar to King's roles. There are these gendered things on top of it where there's the expectation of childbirth, the expectation of marriage in these particularized ways. But what you're doing is high-level diplomatic work all the time. And these women loan money to each other, and these women like are sent on missions to other countries to kind of sweet talk other people. And, you have the weird courtly jobs like being a damisella, which is basically you sit around embroidering with the queen and gossiping. There are all these jobs that are constantly happening. And it's not really until the modern period, and I mean, I don't even mean early modern, I mean like modern period, that women begin to disappear from the household. And that's actually a function of like the Enlightenment, because everyone was so enlightened that they were like, well, scientifically, they're just supposed to be mommies, and they're just supposed to be in the domestic sphere. And like basically the 19th century starts whiling out. Women are told that they can't have jobs and they're sent into the house. But even then, that's only like middle class women. Because, queens are still queening. Very rich ladies still lead charities and do political things. And working class women, the hint's in the name, they had jobs the whole time. They're working, right? So it's just, when we say women aren't in the workplace, we're only talking about middle class women. It's very, very new, and it's a modern problem.